Okay, so let's get started. Today we're going to talk about virtual internships, why they're important. A lot of people don't know what virtual internships are. Some people have a vague idea, but whether you're an employer, a student, or a school, and if you're unsure of how virtual internships work or haven't even considered them, the efficiency and the flexibility of a virtual internship program, then you really do need to pay attention to this presentation, get up to speed, learn how to use virtual internships in your business, how to promote them to your students if we've got some teachers and colleges and universities on the line. And if you're an intern, obviously, what you need to do to prepare for a virtual internship. So let's jump in. What are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to go over what a virtual internship is, why they're important, the pros and cons of virtual internships, and which types of internships are most and least suited to be virtual. How to make a virtual internship effective for all parties, that's the employer, the student/intern, and the colleges and universities out there who obviously have a vested interest in making sure their internships are effective for their students. The steps that schools can provide students to better prepare them for virtual internships, and how potential interns can best prepare for a virtual internship. So let's talk about what is a virtual internship. Well, let's take a step back and understand what the actual definition of an internship is, because that's really important, because there's not a real clear definition out there. And NACE, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, came out this past year and gave us a really good definition of what an internship is. And they say an internship is a form of experiential learning that integrates knowledge and theory learned in the classroom with practical application and skills development in a professional setting. Internships give students the opportunity to gain valuable applied experience and make connections in professional fields they're considering for career paths, and give employers the opportunity to guide and evaluate talent. So that's what an internship is. Now, for the purpose of virtual internships, we're going to take this a little bit further and define what that professional setting is. It's a virtual or remote environment. So it's anything from email communications, Skype conversations and interviews, instant messaging, phone conversations, webinars, project management tools and software that you might use in a virtual environment, SMS or text messaging, and all other manners of virtual communication. So that's what a virtual professional setting can be defined as. So if we put that all together and we take the NACE definition and when we further define what a virtual professional setting is, we get the virtual internship definition. And a virtual internship is the opportunity for an intern to gain real-world experience by integrating the knowledge learned in the classroom with on-the-job training and experience while working in a remote professional setting. So it's really important to really understand what a virtual internship is before we can move forward and talk about, well, what works and what doesn't work in it for a virtual internship. So let's also understand why virtual internships. Why are they so important? And it's really for two reasons. Our current economy that we live in and the global workforce that we're all now working in and have to learn to work in. So let's first take the economy. Most people know, whether you're in the U.S. or anywhere else in the world, that the economy is not so great right now. We're going through a recession. We're going through the worst time in history since the Great Depression for unemployment. As of September 2011, the United States Bureau of Labor reported that unemployment was at 9.1% overall in the U.S. However, for the new worker, those are aged 20 to 24, unemployment was at 14.3%. I mean, those are staggering numbers. It's almost close to double. So, with a limited number of jobs available and a high level of unemployment, those with more experience quickly grab new jobs coming into the market before the new worker with no experience even has a chance. So we've got to find ways for people to get experience. So internships are a great way for people to get experience who don't have experience. And virtual internships provide the opportunity for students to get experience very inexpensively, and we're going to talk about that later. They can still get experience, from home, from their school, without a lot of added expense of going to an on-site internship. And for the business owner or the organization out there, they're facing a really difficult time. Whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're the government, whether you're a for-profit business, here in intern profits, we don't differentiate whether you're any of those. Internships to us, the same rules apply. Everyone's struggling out there to grow, whether it's the organization, maintaining government services, or growing a for-profit business. So virtual internships are also a low-cost opportunity for business owners. So and organizations out there. So we'll explore some of that further in the presentation, but really the economy is a prime time right now for people to start exploring virtual internships, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of them that will help further illustrate why right now with the economy we should be talking about virtual internships. So another reason, we talked about the student and the new worker, they can't get a job. We talked about the employer just now. So all of these reasons why the current economy is causing all these problems and why we need to be focusing on virtual internships. So let's also talk about, which I think this is, even when the economy turns around, a lot of you will say, well, we can't blame the economy. We can't use the economy for excuses in business and, for internships and virtual internships. Well, this one will apply no matter what's going on in the economy, and that's a global workforce. Right now, there's very few people who work in an organization who probably don't have interaction with someone on a regular basis that they've actually never met face-to-face. So we have a global workforce, whether that's you have colleagues in a different city, different state, different country that work within your organization, or you have contractors, virtual assistants, etc., who work in different areas that you may never actually meet face-to-face. And what does that mean for the new worker? Well, for the new worker, they need to learn very quickly how to be successful in a virtual, remote environment. So virtual internships are the key for that on-the-job training and how to interact in a virtual environment. So I'm going to talk about that further when we talk about the pros and cons a little bit more in the presentation. But obviously a global workforce is a very important thing to remember when we're talking about virtual internships. So let's move on. Let's talk about the pros and cons of virtual internships. Well, let's first talk about the pros for the intern, because internships, they're for the intern, right? By definition. So the pros are flexibility. A virtual internship allows the intern to work when they have some free time, to work around their school schedule, to work around their social schedule and their work schedule. A lot of students nowadays are working part to full-time during school in addition to trying to get an internship, because they're working, as in Starbucks, or they're waitressing, or they're working in a retail shop. So they're doing things to earn money, but they want real professional experience. They may not have the ability and the flexibility in their schedule to go to an on-site internship, but they can work for a virtual internship around all of those other activities and requirements they have on their time. So great flexibility with virtual internships. Low cost. There's no commuting cost. There's no cost of a wardrobe. There's very little cost for cost of living, relocation, etc. They can work from home in their pajamas and still be as effective at their internship. There's less hours actually for the virtual intern, and when I say less hours, for those of you who are the employers out there, it doesn't mean they're going to work less for you. So just because it's virtual, you can still require them to have a certain amount of hours that they dedicate each week to your internship, but there's less low impact hours. So there's less hours where they're in the office but they're not doing anything. So they're not wasting any time. They're not wasting time on commuting, whether it's a 15-minute commute or it's an hour commute. Time is money, and it's the same for the intern. They can work more efficiently by having a remote virtual internship. They can work longer term because they're not coming to your office, possibly relocating. A lot of summer internships, people will move to another city. Some actual during the school year, they'll move to another city. So they're only allowed to be there for a few months. Now, a virtual internship, quite often we're seeing a lot of students are able to take on the internship for a longer term, see projects and tasks through their completion versus only being able to work on a small part of a project or an event or a task. They're able to see it through, so they can come on for 6 months, a year, and provide some real impact on the organization and really learn about the business and the industry because they're there longer. They're able to utilize modern technology, and any organization out there is using modern technology, and whether that's learning project management software, whether that's using Skype effectively, because there's ineffective ways of using Skype and professionally. They're able to learn how to use email in a professional manner. All of those things that we're using in modern professional settings, they're going to be quickly learning how to use those because that is their form of communication. That's their way of working together collaboratively with other groups, so within an organization. So they have this great opportunity to hone their skills using modern technology. they're obviously going to be improving on their communication skills. If you don't work face-to-face with somebody, you need to learn how to communicate in an effective way, get your points across, and understand when people communicate with you, whether that's being able to take direction, instructions. So it's going to improve the intern's ability to communicate by the nature of the virtual setting, so to be good listeners, good implementers based on information they're giving both verbally, written, and possibly through video, etc. Obviously, they're going to learn really good self-management skills. Now, I talked about that global workforce. Chances are in anyone's professional career now, you are going to have some sort of remote virtual telecommuting setup in your professional career. So it's now or never. Learn to do self-management skills in order to be successful on your virtual internship. If they learn those skills now, they're going to serve them a lot later on in life. Obviously, there's no geographical limitations, and this is probably, in addition to the flexibility and low cost, the number one reason for virtual internships. And that allows students who live in, let's say, Kansas City, where they might not have as many opportunities for public relations internships or finance internships, that allows them to take an internship abroad, elsewhere, either abroad or in New York City or in LA or one of the bigger cities, but they are still at home or at their home school, going to school. They're able to work for a lot of different companies and not just those in their backyard. So it's a huge advantage for the intern. And finally, virtual internships allow for an increased critical and independent thinking because they're not necessarily being, someone's not always babysitting them. They have to think critically. They have to think outside of the box. They have to be able to improve on those skills as they go along, and virtual internships allow those skills to be honed and improved upon. Now, let's move on to pros for the employer. The virtual internship has a lot of the same pros for the employer as it does for the intern, like flexibility. It allows employers not to have a full-time intern who they don't have enough work for. So it allows you the flexibility to bring on an intern to work on a specific project. They're able to fulfill the intern's hourly requirements based on a project, not necessarily having an intern come sit around in their office with nothing to do. So it provides the employer with some flexibility where they can bring on an intern to work on a specific project, but not have them sit around all day and not necessarily have enough work for them full-time. So it's a great opportunity for the employer. It's also low cost and overhead for the employer. They don't have to provide them office space or other office resources like a computer, et cetera, a phone, because the intern won't be in the office, so they're not taking up the office space. They're not using office resources, and the intern's working remotely, so they're using generally their own laptop. They're going to be using their own resources for phone calls, fax, et cetera. And obviously we'll talk about that later and how the employer can make it more successful for a virtual internship, some of the tools and resources they can use to make sure that that is successful. So we'll get to that later, but it is very low cost and overhead for the employer. It also allows the employer a larger applicant pool. And again, this is a big one. It's the same for the intern as it is for the employer. The employer is not just limited to those students who are, in their backyard, per se, or students who are able to relocate to their hometown where they run their business or organization. They're able to pull applicants from other states, other countries, other time zones to work on their company. So they have a larger applicant pool, larger talent pool. They get longer time commitments, and this goes back to what we talked about with the intern. Obviously, the intern, if they don't have to relocate or come on site every day, oftentimes they're able to commit to the employer for a longer time. And obviously time management from the employer's perspective. If you know you have an intern and you've set it up and you have systems and processes in place and you're going to interface with your intern every Monday at 8 a.m. And you touch base with them every day via email, Skype, you can manage your time and become a better manager using virtual internships because you don't have, well, I know my intern's coming in tomorrow and he's going to be in the office, so I'll just get to it then. Well, if you're going to utilize your intern effectively and they're virtual, you can't just assume they're coming in. You've got to actually keep them busy and find things for them to do and manage yourself as well. So it's a great time management for the business owner. Obviously less interruptions because you're having, not someone in your office. You're able to just deal with things on, once a day, twice a day, and then those weekly, monthly calls we'll talk about later. Now, there are cons involved with virtual internships. Now, they're not for everyone, and they're not a solution for everyone. So let's talk about for the intern. Communication. If in a remote work environment, an intern may have a hard time learning professional communication skills like the ability to read body language and build rapport with his coworkers. They're not going to be able to learn those kind of communication skills. And if they're not comfortable with asking their employer questions and raising concerns, and they're not a good communicator, they're going to have a hard time. They can't just walk down the hall and ask their employer, how do I do something, that hands-on help that some people need. So that is a con. Management skills. If the student or intern is not self-disciplined and doesn't have appropriate management skills, they're not going to be successful in a virtual internship. Now, we talked about it. They have the ability to practice those in a virtual internship setting, but if they need more face-to-face management in order to be successful, virtual internships aren't going to work for them. Cost. There are some costs for interns for virtual internships, and that would be mostly the access to a computer or laptop, the internet, and some sort of phone service in order for them to speak to you. And a lot of that can be provided for free through some resources, that you can use online, like Skype. There's some free phone services now you can use through the internet. You can obviously use a lot of things as long as you have internet and a computer. And most people nowadays have a laptop. I can't imagine if you're a college student that you don't have a laptop or at least have access to them. So the costs are pretty minimal for the intern, but there could be some costs there involved. Networking. Now this is another one. In a virtual environment, interns have less opportunity for professional networking, face-to-face networking. They're going to have to learn to use LinkedIn, ask for more references and referrals from their employer because it's a virtual setting. There's ways to get around that and ways to help the intern network, but generally there's not a lot of face-to-face networking. And the other big one is it's often difficult for the intern to learn corporate culture because they're not in the office. The employer has a hard time conveying what corporate culture is, and the intern likewise would have a hard time understanding that, not being in the office. So those are the cons for the intern. Let's now talk about cons for the employer. If you're not a strong manager, if you don't know how to manage, if you don't have clear processes, systems, and understandings of your purpose and the outcome of every single project you put an intern on, it might be difficult to manage a virtual intern, and it might not be successful. So it will require the employer to have good management skills or learn them very quickly if you're going to do a virtual internship. Communication. Likewise, the employer, without constant and detailed attention to consistent and open communication, there's probably going to be a lack of it's going to be difficult for the virtual internship to be successful. There's not going to be a team building, and there's not going to be this rapport that you might be able to build with an intern actually in the office. But if you have consistent communication and you check in and you manage your intern like you would any other virtual employee, you could overcome that. But there are some problems with virtual internships on the communication side. And of course, you cannot have interns working on hands-on projects, and those are things like helping with possibly events and execution of an event, things where you might need an intern to assist you just with day-to-day activities. Those are not going to be projects you'll have a virtual intern working on. And of course, again, the corporate culture. You'll have a hard time conveying your corporate culture in a virtual setting. Now, let's move on to what internships are most suited for virtual internships. Now, these are the ones we believe provide the most opportunity to be successful in a virtual or remote setup, and that would be anything in the information technology arena. Most of that right nowadays in the professional setting is being done remotely through telecommuting, so anything in that area works very well for a virtual internship. Software development, same. It goes there with the IT. Marketing, there's so many things that can be done in the marketing arena around virtual internships. Social media included. Research is an awesome virtual internship because the intern doesn't necessarily need to be in an office to do research, and there's a lot of students out there who need to do research and show that they can do research and writing. So, again, writing, both of those, they don't need to be in the office to do that. You can have conversations, you can flesh out ideas via phone or Skype or email, so great virtual internships. Journalism, some journalism, that again, you don't really need face-to-face, obviously if they're going to be doing interviews, but a lot of those you can do via phone, email, Skype, whatever, so you can really have good virtual internships there. Virtual internships in the media, pre- and post-event planning. video creation and editing, great opportunity for the virtual internship. Human resources, you know, a lot of headhunting companies now are all remote. They don't even have offices, and if they do, they're still headhunting for people across the country. Graphic design, search engine optimization and marketing, SEO, you know, all of those things are online and very easy to do virtually. So there's some internships that not all will be appropriate, but some you could. So like nonprofits and government internships, some of those you would need an on-site intern, but there's a lot of opportunities there virtually as well. Some political internships you could have virtual. Some engineering internships could easily be virtual, and some public relations internships. So let's move on to those least suited for virtual internships. And that would be anything related to health. And that would, you know, there are a lot of things we talked about earlier in the health field where you could have an intern working on things in a health field. But when it comes to actually seeing patients, doing real clinical work with patients, obviously it needs to be on-site and interacting with people. So wouldn't work for virtual. Education definitely wouldn't work. Art and music, that, you know, that's really hands-on internships where people would really need to be on-site with the organization in order to be successful. Film and TV, you know, they could work on certain things for film and TV, but to really get an idea of how it works, they probably need to be on-site to do that. Events, some nonprofits and government internships, some political internships, some engineering internships, and some public relations internships. Though all of these could be areas and tasks that and projects that interns could work on in these specific fields where they could be virtual. Well, how do we make virtual internships effective? Let's first talk about considerations for the employer. You know, we talked about communication. There's pros and cons there for the employer, but in order for them to virtual internship to be successful, you need to provide clear and consistent communication on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. As an employer, you have to have systems and processes. If you don't have systems and processes to monitor the intern and the projects and tasks they're working on, you're not going to be successful with a virtual intern. You need to make sure you have make accessible to your intern appropriate technology and information like instant messaging, Skype, email, text messaging, forums, membership sites, intranets, project management software, all those things that virtual companies and telecommuting companies use to be successful. You'll need to have those in your virtual internship program and make sure that your interns have access to those as well. You definitely want to have clearly defined projects with a communicated purpose and outcome, you know, understood by both the employer and the intern. You know, a lot of times people assign tasks and they don't even really know clearly what the outcome is supposed to be, you know, and identifying a manager and a team to whom the intern reports and making sure the intern knows that, you know, who do they report to. You want to make sure you're having those weekly phone calls with your intern, and obviously day to day whenever your intern works, reporting. What we do with our interns is every day that our intern works, they have to send us an email. That way if we didn't talk to them all day or Skype with them, we know they worked and they tell us three things: what they worked on and the outcomes they got, any problems they faced, and any questions they have. And that way I know every day that the intern worked for me remotely, what they've done, what they've accomplished. I also want to know, another thing we ask them is, how many hours did you work? So we want to know how long something took them to do. So very important to have clear communication and weekly, daily, monthly, you know, touches, and at a minimum weekly phone calls with your virtual intern. You want to engage your intern. This is really important. You want to engage them in important trainings or meetings that directly impact their work that he or she's doing. You know, also we talked about that corporate culture, which is hard to communicate to a virtual intern. Well, one way you can do it is engaging them in employee morale or volunteer opportunities or anything that you might be doing that could increase the intern's feeling of belonging or involvement in your company. You want to have a really good onboarding process, and this is everything from, you know, getting them set up with that technology we talked about, who they report to, understanding management, understanding the corporate culture as much as possible, getting them access to all the software and information they need. That's really important to have a clear, defined onboarding process. That's important no matter if it's virtual or not, but with the virtual intern it's so important because if you don't get them set up right from the beginning, it can quickly go downhill. You also obviously want to make sure they have adequate training, all the information they will need to be successful in a virtual situation. So you might not be there to give them face-to-face instructions, but you can easily give them training that you have access to, whether that's an online training program, access to an expert within your organization, making sure they have adequate training to be successful. Now here's some considerations for the intern. They need to learn tools and software used in a virtual environment. So before interns even go out and try to get a virtual internship, it would be smart for them to learn some tools and software, like how to use Skype, use it in a professional setting. How to use LinkedIn, how to use that to help you find a virtual internship, how to put yourself out there professionally on LinkedIn, how to use social media effectively. That's the next one. Practicing caution on social media, not using, once you're in a professional environment, Facebook and Twitter and all those things become a way for an employer to learn more about you, and especially if it's a virtual internship, they're definitely going to be going on there to learn more about the student or potential intern. So practicing caution, understanding how to use that effectively, how to utilize technology. Not just knowing that it's out there, but how to utilize current technology to help them either land the virtual internship or help them professionally. And that's including, like, video resumes are becoming huge now. There's a ton of people out there using video resumes and creating online portfolios of their work. So if you're a writer, samples of your work. If you're a graphic designer, samples of your designs. Learning, as I talked about, using Skype interviews and LinkedIn profiles effectively. Being able to ask questions and having open communication. The intern needs to work on these if they need training, if they need help, if they, while they're on the internship practicing this, moving out of their comfort zone and asking questions and having open communication. And obviously as an employer, you want to mentor the intern that it's okay to ask questions because you need to be successful. So that's some things that the intern will need to work on. They need to dedicate a workspace. It has to be somewhere that they go every day. This will help with the learning self-discipline and managing themselves. A dedicated workspace is definitely going to help the intern be successful in the virtual internship. Now, we believe there's a lot of considerations that the schools can make in order to prepare students right now for virtual internships, and this is really important. Workshops and courses on virtual internships. What can schools do? They can prepare their students to take on virtual internships. Everything we just talked about that the intern should be prepared for could be part of these workshops or courses. They can give training on modern and virtual technology. So this would be everything from software for project management software, where in remote environments, this often project management software is being used to track projects and their completion. Everything from how to use Skype and email and instant messaging, message boards and forums, how to use those. All this virtual technology, schools could start using, training their students on that. Guidance on uses of social media. I talked about that when we talked about considerations for the intern. There needs to be training, whether it's from the Career Services Center at schools or through a professional development course that the schools offer, but obviously some guidance and use of all social media. That's LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, because once you hit the professional world, that's a really important thing to consider for the student. And training and usage and building of LinkedIn profiles. That's right now where people are finding potential employees and interns. So it's really important that schools help their students do that, give them some guidance, and help them build their LinkedIn profiles. And obviously helping them possibly put together video resumes and practicing virtual interviews. This is great. Something they could do during these career fairs out there is have practice virtual interviews. How do you present yourself? What do you wear? What's the backdrop supposed to look like? And those video resumes, how do you present yourself? Very important in this virtual world we live in, where people want information quickly and they want to be able to see who they might be hiring. So you've seen all of the pros and cons, and you've seen those internships that are most and least suited. You know how to be effective in a virtual internship. If you're going to have a virtual internship as the employer, if you're going to be an intern virtually, how you can be effective and how you can be successful, and obviously how the schools can be helpful in that endeavor as well. So as you can see, there are win-win when they're done correctly, but you have to follow some of the guidelines we've set out there. This concludes the presentation on virtual internship.